Good morning, everyone. My name is Bradley Sherman. I'm founder and CEO of Human Change, a strategic advisory firm that's helping organizations understand the big demographic shift that we're going through right now, which is declining birth rates and increasing older populations, and building strategies for these organizations about what to do not only for the future of labor, but for the future of consumer markets. And top line, you need the two to go hand in hand in order to profit from this period. And this is my colleague, Megan Gerhardt. Megan will introduce herself during the session of her presentation later this morning, and then we'll go into a hopefully robust Q&A with you. We want to spend as much time with you as possible because this is a new and novel period for just about every country around the globe right now. And I'm sure you represent a diversity of industries. I hear Portuguese, I hear English. So I know that there's a diversity of geography as well too. So when we get to Q&A, just for housekeeping, there is a microphone in the room. We are recording this, so please step up to the microphone, let us know who you are, which organization you're from, and where in the world you've flown here to be, or driven if you're from the Hill Country, and let us know what your question is. So diving in today, we're going to try to achieve three big issues. We're going to understand the signs and signals of demographic change that are happening right now because they are happening fast and furious, faster in some parts of the world than others. We're going to understand how these shifts really impact labor and consumer markets, because most of us in this room grew up with this idea that there was going to be perpetual growth, and those days are coming to a close. And then we'll close with the power of intelligence, how we can really maximize human potential within the workplace by getting people of different ages to work together in a more holistic way. At Human Change, we tell our partner organizations that they can win the future. And we do this by really diving deep into data. So we analyze the right demographic data that's out there right now, stuff you can find from Department of Labor, Census, et cetera. And then we track emerging tastes, trends, and technologies at the same time. What's bubbling up? What are the things that people are talking about? What technologies are people using? And then we do something unique. We look back into the past. So in our strategic foresight practice, the past is actually one of the most important things because human beings have this really terrible habit of repeating themselves. And as Mark Twain said, and this is our central ethos, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So we take that rhyming of history and we apply it to the future. And then we develop accurate foresight predictions, giving people a good sense of what they can expect in 5, 10, even 20-year event horizons, and then build winning strategies for them. And we work with some of the biggest brands across the country and around the world. I just got back from Lisbon. I spoke at Indeed last week. We're open and ready to help you if you're interested in working with us. First of all, though, you have to know the change is here. And like I said, for all of us, we grew up in a world where youth was the dominant marketplace. It's where we went for labor. It's where we sold products and services. That is starting to shift, and we're seeing it show up in popular media right now, and in popular culture. The president is running for re-election at 81 years old. I was interviewed by CNN about this yesterday morning. It's a big issue, but it illustrates now that the potential of what a human being can do, we're actually really undervaluing it. We've been undervaluing it for a long time. And not only can older adults be used as workers, they can also be used to sell products and services. I think that last year's Loeva campaign, because it was in the last quarter of last year, really signals this because Loeva is a young, hip brand, yet they used a woman in her 90s on their campaign. And it's not just to sell to older adults, it's also to sell to younger adults. We are in what is a historic demographic transition. Make no mistake about this. We have never gone through this before in the history of the world. The world has always grown. But right now, what we're experiencing in a lot of the major economies is that we're starting to see declining population growth. You see, every woman needs to have 2 babies, at least, to maintain the population. In almost every developed country, that's now below 2. In some countries, Korea, China, That's dropped below 1. Is there anyone from Puerto Rico here? No. That's the only state in the United States where the population, the birth rate has actually dropped below 1. And that suggests a significant decrease in the global population eventually. So we're here right now. We still have positive population growth. The world is still growing. We're still on track to grow for the next couple decades. But guess what? By 2086, the UN predicts the world population will stop growing, and for the first time in human history, it will go into reverse. This is a conservative number. This is a super conservative number. In reality, world population will likely start reversing as early as the 2050s. We'll all see that in our lifetime. All human population growth, for the most part, and at least where we'll see the massive growth, is going to come exclusively from sub-Saharan Africa. Why is that, you ask? Well, the average woman in sub-Saharan Africa is having 7 babies in their lifetime. In Korea, the average number, 0.78. Actually dropped to 0.72 this year, I'm sorry to say. So the makeup of the world is going to change. Where we get labor from, where consumer markets are coming from, are going to change. But in the West, in places like Brazil, the United States, across Europe, we're seeing rapid growth of older adults. So the shift of our population is causing us to rethink where we actually get productive opportunity from and where we can reach potential consumer markets. Take a look across the board. Every country in the OECD is getting old, and it's getting old fast. In Japan right now, which is the oldest country on the planet, about 1 out of 3 people is over the age of 65. In the United States, this is 1 out of 5 in 2050, or 2030 rather, I'm sorry. But I want to be abundantly clear here. Don't look at national statistics. You are all working for companies within certain cities or certain regions, and each region, each city has its own demographic profile as it relates to age. So if I go into some of the rural counties in this country, I can already find 1 out of 3 people over the age of 65. That's easy. That's very easy to find. And in just a few years, I mean, less than a decade, in some of these counties, it'll be 1 out of 2 people over the age of 65. So we only have a few tools that we can really use right now to expand the pie, build the economy, keep things growing, keep things moving, and engaging older adults is one of them. Building up immigration is the second one, although that might run out in a number of years. And the third thing is leveraging technology. Ideally, your organization is thinking through all 3 of these strategies right now. If not, we're going to give you some ideas of how to do this going forward. Now, there's always a worst case scenario because this is what we call a long-term trend. It's slowly changing. Think of it like an iceberg. It moves at such a slow pace that most people have not been paying attention to it. It's a lot like climate change. People didn't pay attention to climate change until the weather started getting really weird, until we started having severe storms. Well, people really didn't start paying attention to demographic change until, I really think, COVID. I think Megan would agree. COVID, because all of a sudden we had 3 million extra older adults leave the workforce that were not scheduled to depart. Another 3 million have left in the United States because the stock market is performing so well and their portfolios look good. But if we don't engage older adults in particular for longer periods of time, we're going to see consumer spending slow. It's like putting the brakes on the economy. We're going to see the tax base erode because guess what? If you're not working, you're not paying taxes. Taxes go to pay for services that everyone needs. Social welfare programs, as a result, will collapse. So if you want your pension, you want your Social Security check, you want your public health care, people have to stay working for longer than they are currently. The unintended consequence is that a credit rating for a country can downgrade as a result of that, where the dependency ratio is essentially out of whack. If that happens, guess what? No new roads, no new bridges, no new big infrastructure projects. The wheels start going off at a pretty fast pace. But we have a real big opportunity right now to turn this around. And that's what's so exciting about the Gentelligence practice and thinking through having a demographic strategy within your workplace. Because if you have these, you can actually expand the pie, you can build your profits, and you can actually contribute to the common good. Now, Make no mistake, I keep talking about how big of a transition this is, but I've been talking about older adults. There were about 76 million baby boomers at their peak. That's a lot of people. That's our largest generation in the history of the United States. There are only 69 million Gen Zs. So that means there's a 7 million person differential that we have to figure out how to make up somehow. That's the headline. The subheadline is Gen Alpha is even smaller, significantly smaller than Gen Z. So this is going to be a long-term trend. So over the next decade, we're going to see a significant increase in older workers, people over the age of 65. So let me ask you the question. So if 65 plus looks on this chart to be the fastest growing group of older adults in the workplace, what is the fastest beyond 65 plus? I'll give you a book if you know the answer. 75 and over is the answer. 75 and over is the fastest growing group now in the workforce. In fact, in a decade, they're going to jump by nearly 100%. That is a significant shift. And while a lot of people will bemoan the fact that they have to work longer than in previous generations, we're actually going back in history because as late as 1950, 1 out of 2 men were in the workforce. By 1990, it was about 1 out of 8. Today, it's about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4, somewhere in between those two. There is a significant shift, though, that's not being fully understood by organizations. So even though we know that organizations understand that this is happening kind of at a base level, they get it, they don't have it as part of their DEI strategies. And while both Megan and I see this changing, it's happening at a very glacial pace. And there probably isn't a more pressing issue right now for organizations than figuring this one out. And there are just so few people that really can help these organizations navigate this. We know, though, just like other diversity efforts, that when you do it right, it actually fattens the bottom line. Because when you have older people, in particular, working alongside younger people, there's a lot of spillover effect that happens. There's quite a bit of mutual mentoring that occurs. And more importantly, because we have this rapid growth of older adults, and now they're starting to work longer, we have this emerging consumer group too. So again, a little quiz, free book if you know it. Fastest growing demographic group in the world right now, by age. No? Give me an age. Give me an age number. 85 plus. No one's going to get a book. Come on, guys. Okay. Second fastest growing demographic in the world. This is worldwide. Second fastest growing demographic. 85. I'm going to give it closest without going over. It's 100 plus, so you will get a book. Congratulations. The number of centenarians in this country alone is set to quadruple in the next 25 years. Everything changes, folks. Everything changes really quick. So the fact that you're in this room right here, right now, shows that at least you're interested enough to tap into it and think about what's next to come. You are the tip of the spear. Now, what's the change opportunity? Because all of this sounds like problematic right now. There are great opportunities for organizations because what's the one constant in this world? Change. It always occurs. It's always there. You always have to be tacking your sails to the change that's coming your way. So if you tap into this generational diversity, if you tap into older adults working alongside younger adults, you leverage things like technology in your workplace to work alongside them, you will improve organizational efficiency. But you got to make sure people have the skills. Our entire education model, doesn't matter where you are in the world, is built on a medieval model. It's a medieval model where average life expectancy was 35. Average life expectancy in most developed countries is around 80 now. So we're still educating people for the same period of time, but then we're saying, good luck with the next 60 years. So these investments that we need have to come from multiple places. If you're an HR practitioner, this is one of the best places to deliver this lifelong learning. But it shouldn't just be on the organization. Each one of us is responsible for retooling and reskilling ourselves over the life course. And guess what? It's more important now than ever, because this period of demographic transition is also being connected to a period of rapid technological advancement. And if you're not keeping up with these skills, either from your employer or from you as an individual, you will be pushed out. You have to develop innovative products and services. This actually comes when you build generational diversity within the workplace. And we've seen this practice happen at a number of different organizations worldwide. The first company to really do this was BMW. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, BMW, that doesn't sound like a company that hires older workers or engages a generationally diverse practice. But they were the first ones to do this because they asked their workers what they needed. And they asked their workers what they needed because they saw in the demographic profile, that assessment, something that we do at Human Change, that they were running out of workers. Their pipeline of young workers was really slowing down. People were starting to exit, and if they didn't do something quick, well, people would leave, and they wouldn't be able to build those beautiful luxury cars. So what happened was BMW made some modifications to their workplace, engaged their workers of all generations, and guess what happened? Because they engaged their workers of all generations, people automatically started to like their jobs more. Because they gave them the tools to do their jobs, they did their jobs better, quality improved, and because they had 17, 18-year-olds working alongside 70, 75-year-olds, all of a sudden there was a great knowledge transfer happening within the enterprise. So some of the functionality that you have in your cars today that you think is rather commonplace is novel against the backdrop of the automotive industry. The push-button start, for example. Everyone has a push-button start there. That's to help older drivers, because it's really hard to get a tiny little key into that tiny little hole when it's dark, and it's even harder to turn it over if you have any dexterity or strength issues. And that's one of those innovations that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have that kind of generational churn in the workplace. Of course, we'll see the economy expand. This is super important. We'll see a lowering of the burden on social welfare systems. Again, we need this now. In this country, Social Security and Medicare run out of money in a decade. We need it. And it's part of a revisioning, it's part of a renegotiation of the larger social contract. But of course, this is the biggest part here. And I'm going to wrap soon because Megan has much more interesting things to say than me. We actually enhance individual health and financial security as a result. When you work longer, you're earning longer. When you're earning longer, you're engaged longer. When you're engaged longer, you're healthier for longer. And I'm not just talking about physical health. Mental health improves, cognitive health improves. And in fact, the research backs this up. In countries where there's a lower retirement age, there is a higher rate of dementia. So just by staying in work, you're limiting your potential to be isolated and to become sick later in life, and of course, then become a burden. And none of us want to be a burden. So on that, I'm going to pass over to Megan for, like I said, I think the more interesting and engaging part, because it gives you more of the tools that you need to use, and then we'll go right into Q&A. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? I am going to give my books away. I will promise soon that will happen. So Bradley and I enjoy really digging into what I think is a fascinating field of work. I want to share a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this topic with a quick story. So I began my career as a professor when I was just 26 years old, which meant I was actually closer in age to my students than I was to most of my colleagues. So that, for me, was a very interesting situation to be in. And I learned a lot from my older colleagues, as all of us do. I still have wonderful mentors that are older than me, but not through any kind of wonderful strategy, but more out of just natural interest and maybe being so close in age proximity. Really found myself turning to my students for feedback, input, asking what their perspective was on things, just to see how it compared to mine and that of my older colleagues. And fast forward maybe 6 months into the job, I thought being open to learning in both directions from those older and younger was clearly making me better at my work. And I thought, this is fantastic. I'm an organizational psychologist. That's what I'm trained in. I thought, how are other people enjoying this amazing kind of diversity of thought out there in the workplace? I'm going to go find out. The answer is they were not enjoying it at all. They thought it was horrible and exhausting and frustrating. And that has driven me for the last now 20 years, where I'm not remotely close in age to my students at all, to continue to see why had I had such a positive experience with this when so many other professionals were not. What was going on there, and why was it that had I missed a memo that somehow we were engaged in this generational war that we had all sort of passively agreed to be part of? Why weren't we treating age and generation, connected but different, as we'll talk about in a second, with the same sort of interest and strategy that we do race or ethnicity or gender, all the things that we know are important to manage well and catalyze in our organizations? We were just completely ignoring this and being horrible about it. So the work that I do, as Bradley said, goes under the umbrella of what I call Gentelligence. So I hope when you hear that phrase, you know what it means, but there's the definition. So we need to get smarter about this. If anybody has engaged in this topic before, I'm guessing that you're waiting for my slide where I put up, here's your generation, here's the years, here's the 2 things that happened to you, here's your 3 attitudes, here's your 4 behaviors. Has anybody sat through that presentation? All right, well, I'm not doing that. That's not what I do. So if you're very disappointed, you can leave now, but you won't get a book. I'm just saying, that's coming soon. That's generational stereotyping. That is part of our problem. That is not part of our solution. You could tell me what year you're born. I can't tell you who you are. That's what horoscopes are for. I'm sure there's a session on that, but that's, again, not this session. That's not science. But in sort of that very lazy, stereotypical approach, we disconnect and say, that's not me. I'm not that because I was born in this year. That's millions of people we're talking about. And we leave it because we disconnect and think, well, this just must be pop science. We lose the amazing, interesting complexity that actually comes with digging into what does it mean to be part of a generation? What does it mean to have a generational identity? Growing up during a different period of time than other people absolutely influences your perspective. And I want to talk a little bit about how we know that it does, as opposed to maybe what we've heard. Bradley had this part, so I had to have this part. So I do also work with lots of great organizations across industries. We have, as I'm sure you've heard, 5 generations in the workplace now, although that is a rapidly changing moment. About 3% of our workforce is of the silent generation. So soon we will be at a 4-generation workplace again. But that has really led to a bit of a fever pitch, and I just love working with organizations on really how to reframe what we've looked at traditionally as a very negative conversation into something positive. So just to sort of talk about the generation gap that I want us to focus on, everybody knows this is an issue. Every organization has a multi-generational workforce, and we've had it as long back as we can remember, but we really have no idea what to do about it. We can find several similar statistics. This one's from Deloitte from a couple of years ago, but across the board, it's there. We know it's there. We understand it's difficult, but no one's told us what to do about it yet. So that's the gap that I am filling with Gentelligence. As Bradley said, there's just not much strategy out there. People need tools, they need practical strategies, and that's what I aim to do. So I don't want to talk about, those stereotypes of where we all believe generations, all Gen Zs want this or all millennials want that. I want to talk about the fact that what we're not doing is championing the value that different generations bring in the workforce. If you are managing a multi-generational workforce, you have the potential for 6 decades, arguably, of experience, perspective, different kinds of expertise. Why aren't we leveraging that at this amazing, sustainable kind of talent diversity and saying, well, let's get these people to work together in a way that's innovative and creative and harnesses that complementary knowledge and expertise? We are not doing that. So I do want to show a little bit about when you see those sort of lazy clickbait slides about, but every generation is this. They do come from a place of science. So just really quickly, where they come from is, we know that your most formative years are about 5 to 20, roughly speaking. And during that 5 to 20 year period, age 5 to age 20, your brain is malleable. Your brain is forming its connections. It's figuring out what it thinks about the world. So if you go through something during that time, like the pandemic, we all unfortunately went through that, research shows that that has a more profound effect on you and your outlook and the way you see the world than, for example, it had on my outlook, right? I was 45 when the pandemic happened. My neural connections are pretty set, for better or for worse. And the way I think about things like risk or career are pretty set. But if you know someone who was age 5 to 20 in their most formative years, it profoundly had that strong effect on them because it influenced the way they see the world. So what I like to emphasize, because I put it in big font so you would know it was really important, is that what we need to be looking at is not things like generational stereotypes, cliches, but norms. Norms are gold here because norms don't insist every person in a giant generation is the same, but it's a frequency. Bradley and I are data people, so we like to say, you could track a norm. You could say, this was a much more common outlook, behavior, practice for my generation than my parents or my kids. And so when you look at generational norms, people tend to relax and go, okay, she's not insisting that that was me or that I do that, but I do know a lot more people that had that experience maybe than someone older or younger than me. So these generational norms are what we then see surface as those behaviors and attitudes. So when you see those really stereotypical generational slides, they do come from a pretty solid place. Unfortunately, they've just become very overused and cliched and try to capture millions of people in one box, which can't put people in boxes. We're never right about that. What I like to say and how I like to enter into this is in a very direct way. Generational identity is one layer of who you are. It interacts in an important and fascinating way with other layers. So generation and age, for example, are different, clearly connected. But how many people would say, only share if you want, I'm a millennial, but I'm an older millennial? Is that anybody in the room? All right, I'm a baby boomer, but I'm a younger baby boomer. Is that anybody in the room? All right. So particularly baby boomers and millennials like the asterisk. Like, hold on, I'm not actually that, but they say I am. Age and generation are different layers of identity, as are gender, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, whatever where you grew up in the world. And that's important because your perspective is an interaction of all of those things. And so when you allow people to say, yeah, I guess growing up in the 60s and being a woman and this is all filtering into the lens that I use to see the world. So it's rich, it's complex, it's fascinating, and when we reduce it to a stereotype, we miss all of that. So we are being quite horrible about this, just to be clear. So I collect very bad generational headlines. I wanted to bring many more, but we're trying to be tight on time here. Here's just a few. These are every day. If you can't see that, it says the problem isn't millennials hate boomers, it's that every generation hates everyone else. Well, that's great. That's the foundation that really strong organizations are built on. Continue to see this today. Gen Z is unprepared, they have a poor work ethic. Now millennials are saying that their Gen Zs are a massive headache, so that's great. And then that one's actually my favorite. So if you miss Marmalade, we now know whose fault that is. We need to go find them. We've been really horrible to every generation. Millennials, of course, have really gotten the worst of it. So when things are changing too much, we tend to point our finger at younger generations. When they're not changing fast enough, we point it at older generations. And the point is, why are we pointing fingers at any generation? That this false sort of generational war is certainly not productive, and it's not benefiting anyone. And we need to find a better way to do it. So I think that's a better headline. That was our article that came out in the Harvard Business Review as their big idea in March 2022. I even put an arrow in so that you would see that it is a better headline than the ones that we just looked at. And it was cited as one of their 10 must-reads for this year. So we're really excited because, as Bradley said, people are understanding now the importance of this. We have it. We're not using it well. We're wasting it, worst case scenario. So how do we change that? Now, hopefully you all agree that that's absolutely not okay. And if we saw any kind of other difference, If you saw headlines that had gender or race or ethnicity, pitted against each other, I think we would be horrified and call people, right? We'd say this is not acceptable. But generationally, it happens all the time. Your phones are listening to me, and you will see those headlines later today when you're scrolling your newsfeed. So I apologize for that, but that is the way of things. So what is the cost? I think Bradley did a pretty good job of laying this out for us. I won't land on this slide for too long, but organizationally, just want to highlight a couple things. We're losing talent in every demographic. A lot of my clients call me and they say, we cannot retain our Gen Zs, or our baby boomers are leaving before we expected and they're not retiring, they're going to go work for our competition. The number one reason people leave jobs is they don't feel valued. And value comes from feeling seen, feeling like your needs are recognized, and this is not happening for any generation. I want to point to one other one down there in the interest of time, which is knowledge transfer. I did a panel online. It was a huge audience, and the chat was going crazy, and I happened to look over, and one of the chat comment said, I'm 67 years old. I feel like I have so much to teach, but I don't think anyone here wants to learn from me. Just kind of a heartbreaking statement. And so I paused what I was saying, and I asked the gentleman, I said, when was the last time you were interested in learning from someone younger than you? And we engaged in this conversation about the fact that knowledge transfer is two-way. This isn't just about one age group or generation being overlooked. And that if we're not interested in showing respect to other generations, their interest in hearing from us is going to be pretty small as well. So with the shift in demographics, what are we going to lose when our older generations are ready to exit the workplace? And what are we not learning from younger generations because we maybe aren't willing to ask or don't have that mutual respect? So I learn from my students all the time. We've had great conversations about AI, how they're using it, the ways I think we should use it, why, all of those great things. I'm going to bring the good news because I feel like we have to paint some good news here. The linchpin here really is, like any other kind of diversity, if we don't manage it well, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be exhausting. It's going to be the tension that all of us have experienced. But this can be, and research bears this out, that if we manage it well, on the other side of it, we have all of those wonderful things that I don't need to read to you. But we are tapping into informational networks that are different. Where your kids go to look for information is different than where you go to look for information. My favorite quick story on this is that when we were interviewing people for our book, we interviewed a gentleman who runs a research lab, and he had a very multi-generational team, and they broke apart, a really critical part for a project they were on a deadline to complete. And he said, I don't care how you do it, but when I get back tomorrow, we need that part working. So he showed up the next day, and there were two of the parts sitting on the table, and he said, okay, what happened here? And his baby boomer team member said, well, I fixed it. Like he got in and like MacGyvered the thing, like a screwdriver and some tape. How many people know who MacGyver is? All right, got to check your generational references, people. It's very important.
Original or reboot?
Well, you can tell your neighbor, right? You can educate your neighbor if they didn't know. The other part, what came from his Gen Z undergraduate lab tech member, and he said, well, I just overnighted it on Amazon. Like, that's how you get things, right? So great solutions, not right or wrong, just different. So I have so many examples of that. And that is what we want to tap into. As long as we're focused on the same mission, the fact that I might approach it differently than you shouldn't be annoying. It should be fantastic. Because then what happens if we figure out how to leverage those things together? That's what we want to try to tap into. But the reality is we haven't been given a strategy, and the research shows if you just hire a bunch of people and they are multi-generational and we cross our fingers, that does not work. Age-diverse organizations left to their own devices have higher levels of tension, turnover. It impacts team productivity in a negative way, job satisfaction, all those things in our field that we want to avoid happen with more age-diverse organizations unless we have a strategy, unless managers are proactive, unless we have a plan to do this in a different way. So Gentelligence hopefully is that plan. I don't have time to go into all the details. That's what I do when I do my longer talk in my workshops, but I want to give you the highlight. So we came up with these practices, and if you are a DEI expert or DEI person, these will not look new to you. Because what we did is we said, why aren't we using the practices from diversity and inclusion, the best practices from cross-cultural management towards this topic, this kind of difference we all have? That is the missing piece. Just take a minute and think about, why are only 8% of organizations including age in their DE&I? That's weird. We all have it. We've had it as long. We found quotes back to 4 BC of Aristotle saying, like, what's the hell is wrong with kids these days? Like, it's not a new problem. We just haven't figured out how to solve it yet. So here's our practices. I'm going to do the 30-second version on these, and then I'm going to give away my books as I go. So this is where we're going to check some assumptions. So this is sort of implicit bias 101, or maybe explicit, depending on the headline. How are we walking around assuming certain things with broad brush about different generations? So if you hear somebody say, these young people, that's capitalized, I always say, like, these young people. Like, there's a thing coming after that that's wrong. Have no work ethic, are so disrespectful, they're so flaky. Millennials are entitled. Gen Zs are snowflakes. Okay, boomer. Slacker, Gen, you know them, right? So where are we walking around and saying our older people don't want to engage with AI? They're going to retire soon. Yikes. The other part of this practice, beyond bias, is where are we assuming that we're all defining things in the same way? Like, we're missing the memo that when you say we're going to design a flexible workplace, that might mean something very different if I'm 26 versus 56. That if I grew up going to work every day, 5 days a week, and suddenly I only have to go in 3, that looks amazing. But if I started work during the pandemic as a Gen Z and I was going into work 0 days and now I have to go in 3, that sounds bad. That's not flexible. What are you talking, right? It's a contrast effect. The same way that Gen X was called a slacker because the baby boomers were used to working 60 hours a week and we wanted more work-life balance. It's not right or wrong, it's just different. It's a contrast effect. All right, here's where I'm giving my books away. All right, last week, a report came out from EY talking about which generations trust AI the most. So this is hot off the press. Which generation do you think, there's a book on the line here that is not going back in my suitcase, trusts AI the most? Gen X. Yes, Gen X.
She gets 2 books.
2 books. 2 books for you, ma'am. These are yours. We're going to start throwing books into the crowd at this point. Most excellent. Most signing books later today. And how about, all right, I'll do another one. How old will the oldest millennials be at the end of 2024? It's 43. That's a little tricky. I'm using the Pew Research Center. They were born starting in 1981, so 43, if we do the math. Who said 43? This is like honor system.
Yeah.
All right, ma'am, book for you, absolutely.
Put it aside.
Yeah. I'm going to give them each a book because they both said 43, and then I'm done, right? Like, I don't have to pack these babies. You're welcome. So these are assumptions, right? I could give you a ton more of assumptions. Like, older people are just as good at using tech as younger people. There's no research showing they're not. It's their motivation to use it that's different. Call me. We'll talk more about that in a longer talk. But these are things that we need to check, right? Is this a lazy stereotype, or do we actually, is that actually true? This one's my favorite, and this is called Adjust the Lens. This plays on this idea, the Walt Whitman, be curious, not judgmental. We like our norms. Our norms that are partially generationally formed are great. That's why we have them and we use them. But when I judge what you do through my norms, I'm going to think that it's wrong. Bradley and I were talking last night at dinner. I had a client come to me with this long list of things that they would like young people to stop doing. Like, they want to talk about salary. We don't want to do that. They seem really interested in titles. Like, do we have to go back to having titles? I said, you don't have to do anything. Do whatever you want. You called me. But how's that working for you? Why are they interested in that? Why is that important to them? That's what we got to dig into. So just really quickly on this one, what I like to say is that if you think about traveling, when you go somewhere, travel abroad, you know you're going to interact with people different than you. You know you're going to interact with people who grew up with different norms and language, and you work a little harder to make sure you're not going to misunderstand what's going on and hopefully not be misunderstood. If we could bring that level of effort and energy into intergenerational interactions, we would save ourselves a lot of headaches. So be curious, not judgmental. I had someone insist that was a Ted Lasso quote. I'm like, I think it's Walt Whitman, but I'm still trying to track down root source on that, but it's definitely not Ted Lasso. That's what we want to try to do, right? We want to understand, and the last kind of Gentelligence drop I'm going to do here, and I was talking earlier about this, is generationally, we all have very similar values. When you look at research and you see no generational differences, it's because we all want similar things. The real interesting piece that Gentelligence digs into is the norms that we've learned to fulfill those needs look different. How do you connect? What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to earn respect? We all want that, but the norms we've learned at the time we grew up may look very different, and they may end up being misunderstood. All right, I'm gonna do the last two together because we want to have time for Q&A. The final practices here are, how do we build up that positive potential? So the two practices that we have around this, and we have tools and strategies and exercises and questions for people to use for these, is we have to strengthen trust. We have to build psychological safety. We have to make people feel like this place cares about me. They see my unique value. They know what I need. I feel safe asking questions here, whether I'm 65 trying to learn something new or 25 and have a great idea. And then finally, the expand the pie. There was a Gentelligence article translated into Spanish, and they called it Bake Bigger Cake, which is like way better than expand the pie. But this is a negotiation term about the fact that we are not in competition. We should be in collaboration, that we need to stop being threatened by what other generations do or do differently, and instead replace that scarcity perception with one of growth. That, as I said in the beginning, we're all going to be better at our work if we have access to more points of view and more perspectives and types of expertise that are very inherent in growing up and beginning our work in different periods of time. So that's the sort of wrap for me. This is what Gentelligence is about. It's not about boxes. It's not about stereotypes. It's about giving people tools and strategies to have these smarter intergenerational conversations. As Bradley said, we don't have a choice anymore. You know, our demographics are showing that we're going to need all of our workers engaged. We're going to need to be paying attention to lifespans and career paths and keeping people engaged in our societies and in our workplaces as long as possible. So we have to find a new way to engage on this. All right, so with that.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. And we'll,
you need that?
No, I just need that.
Oh, you want that?
Yeah, no. Just like the top line that we want you to walk away from today is that ageism is one of those biases that we do not talk about enough, and yet it's everywhere. It is one of the only biases that is still accepted in national media and perpetrated on nighttime TV. It is a bad thing within your business. I mean, it is really bad. And it's not just older adults that face this. Younger adults face it too, and people in middle age, because of this misunderstanding amongst the generations. Sorry. We do think, both Megan and I agree entirely, that it is part of this DEI conversation, and it needs to be more upfront and center. And again, inclusion stimulates innovation, and innovation and inclusive businesses are good. They work better than those that aren't. Now, to put a bow on this, before we do go into Q&A, how many of your organizations are actually thinking about age right now? Maybe 20%?
Maybe.
I cannot underline this more than I could possibly. This reality, the great negotiation, which is happening at work, with people asking for more, different types of work scenarios, different types of salary arrangements, different types, you name it. This does not go away for at least 20 years, because the labor market will be tighter over the course of the next 20 years as fewer people come in, those Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, fewer people in, more people out. So if you think you have it hard now and you're an HR practitioner, you're a manager, it's going to get a lot worse. That's why this approach, thinking through your demographic strategy for your business, applying Gentelligence principles to your workplace, is so radically important. So with that, obviously we've got QR codes because we would love you to follow us. The blue one is to get to Human Change. The orange one is to get to my newsletter called New Rules, which is examining all of the disruption that's happening right now in society, AI, tech adoption, demographic change. Comes out 3 times a week at newrulesmedia.substack.com, and Megan's newsletter is the black QR code. So please sign up. We would love to hear from you. You can obviously email us at any time or ping us on one of our many different channels. But now let's take some Q&A.
So my name is Lisa Balser. My organization is my organization. It's called New and Improved. And I sit at the intersection of advertising, marketing, DEI, and creative. I started my company in 2018. I've been talking about this for 15 years, about how we have a very ageist industry, particularly over 40 or 35 if you're a woman. But it works both directions, right? Like, people are not talking generationally. Excuse me. So I actually have I do consulting and assessments and training. So I have a training called Gen All, and it's about how the multi-generational workforce can work better together. I've quoted both of you many times and attributed and recommended your work. But I have a question. So 2 things. One is, while I was here, I got asked for a quote in Forbes because there was a LinkedIn B2B campaign. I don't know if you are familiar with it.
Yeah,
that was extremely ageist and got big backlash. And instead of responding, they doubled down and they didn't remove it. It's been a huge controversy. This is like literally is happening
If anybody
now.
doesn't know what this is, it shows a mother, an older mother who I would say is probably in her 70s or so, talking about cloud computing, and she doesn't know what her son does. He works on a cloud. It's kind of an embarrassing
It's
LinkedIn
really
ad.
offensive, and it's like overly stereotypical. It's like, and there's one with a father as well, and they're just they're really bad and they're ridiculous. And we should know better as advertising people, but clearly we don't. We're perpetuating this. So my question is, so when we talk about demographics from an advertising perspective, obviously you're marketing to different people,
Yes.
right? So what I'm always trying to do is have the conversation of what's happening in the workplace. So last year, I partnered up with AARP, and we created an interactive guide for inclusion in advertising and marketing. This is relevant to my question.
Yeah.
And so, because it's trying to get everyone to work better together. So when you think about specific verticals, right, like this industry, how do you, I would ask you both, like, what is your thinking about this? Because all of your principles apply to the workforce, but like when it's pushed out into the world and what we're reflecting and affecting, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, when you have diversity of any kind that works, whether it's enterprise, community, et cetera, there's greater understanding and greater empathy. That's the first thing that comes about. Yeah. What I think is interesting from the advertising side of things is being missed. I think that ageist advertising does work. That's why people still do it. But it only works for a certain segment of the population because we're still allowed to be ageist. Racist ads weren't that unusual so long ago. Sexist ads still pop up here and there. They're used because they work.
It's like the final frontier, right?
It's the final frontier, and it's a narrow slice, and I don't condone it, but they do still work. What I think is exciting about age-inclusive advertising or age-agnostic advertising, because there's 2 sides to the coin here. Age-inclusive advertising is not necessarily being used to sell products and services to older adults. This is the real kicker. Intuitively, we think, oh, if I put Dame Maggie Smith in a Loeva ad, she's going to sell to old women. That's what we want to do. We want to get after that demographic. That's not the case. Those advertisements that are using popular culture figures, Michael Stipe is the face of YSL now. Michael Stipe. But also, Diana Ross is a face of YSL right now. They're not necessarily selling to older women. They're selling to younger people who say, I want to be that when I grow up. I think Apple has done the best job of this. Not in terms of the age-inclusive, the age-agnostic advertising. Because they've built everything everyone needs, essentially, into their devices.
Right.
So they ran this campaign. It was last year. It's called the Bob ad, and it pans into it. It was in the original slides. We were so worried about time, though. It pans onto an open forest, and it says, Bob has suffered a significant fall. He's located X longitude, X latitude. Please send help. That advertisement is a reimagination of the Life Alert ads from the 1980s, which said, I've fallen and I can't get up. But by putting it in an active scenario that most people can acknowledge, even my father, who at 73 still rides his mountain bike in the woods, they're able to capture a larger group of people and get to what I call, and more people are calling today, life stage advertising. So you're not going after the 25 to 34s anymore. You're going after people who bike.
Right. It's like the halo effect, really.
It's the halo effect. So I always say to companies, and this gets to Megan's point about expanding the pie in your marketplace too, because if you say, I'm an outdoors company, I only go after 18 to 34s, that's all the people that I want. Okay, layer onto that the 35s to 44s, the 45s to 54s. There are people in these cohorts that want your product too.
And actually have the money to spend.
And have the money.
The other...
But age agnostic is one way to get there. And there's still plenty of people too that want to be young. Like there's still people that are socialized to want that. And they're going to respond to those types of advertisements that make them feel young too.
Agreed. You
All right.
said that very well.
Thank you. Thank you. Come on up.
Hi, thank you all for such a great talk. My name is Aubrey Harrison. I'm head of DEI at a mental health tech company called Two Chairs.
Nice.
My question is really, I love this idea of identity and kind of thinking about just generational identity. My question is really wondering, how do we get that in the C-suite and really having this conversation well so that we're actually moving the needle? What are your suggestions on
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. So one of the things I've seen, so normally when I go into an organization, the people who call me are DE&I professionals, learning and development professionals, HR professionals, for a webinar, a lunch and learn, whatever, keynote for a conference. If I do my job well, there are people in that room who aren't necessarily those DE&I people who go, oh, damn, we have this issue. And then it was described to me actually a couple days ago by one of my clients as, we think this is the Trojan horse. Like if we can get people to hear this, nobody hears this and goes, I don't agree with that. Like everyone agrees with it and goes, yeah, that's weird. Why aren't we doing anything about it? So I think the best way to do it is you plant the seed of an idea, whether that comes from book club, webinar, a conversation you decide to have at a session you're doing, and it starts to hopefully germinate and evolve where people start having these conversations. And I give these very simple power questions for people to use in talking to the CEO. When they say, these young people, they don't want to work. Is that necessarily true? Right? That's like the professional, respectful way to be like, Ted is crushing it and he's 23. So like maybe we've got this a little bit wrong. I got to be a little bit careful. I think we have to show them that it's not clickbait, it's not surface level, and probably if we're talking C-suite, the impact it's having on the bottom line. I think those organizational outcomes and the fact that we now are able to say, you can't keep losing any demographic. Your pipeline is not going to bear that up. And, I get that question a lot. Like, do we really have to do blank? Again, you don't have to do it, but what you're doing isn't working. So I think we have to start those smarter conversations. We have to show that there's mutual benefit. We really all will strengthen what we're doing collectively. But my experience has been time and time again that we get in the door through the insights of our DE&I and our people leaders even sometimes. And then when it starts working and people are excited and they're interested and they're talking about it, hopefully that buzz catches the attention higher up.
And to expand just a bit on this is that typically the lower the investment, the more interested people are in doing something. The economic argument, though, is the key for both of us. When we go into big organizations, our starting point is either our books or somebody's heard us on a podcast, or in a scenario like this, they invite us in, we do a paid engagement with the team, and then they say, oh, wow, there's something here. The granddaddy of age-inclusive workplaces I talked about was BMW. And BMW, the HR guy in one plant, saw the demographic data, saw the economic risk, and said, we've got to get on this, and we've got to get on this now. And he didn't ask for a lot of money. The investment he asked for was $50,000. And this was in 2008. And they immediately saw improvements across the board. So economic argument and measurable is really the way to get this, I think, fully ingrained within the C-suite. There are C-suite believers that are on board already. So we have time for 2 more questions. Thank you very much.
And we have 2 more people, so
We have
that
2 more
works out
people, so
great.
that's perfect.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you so much. My name is Kate Wallhauser. I live down the road in San Marcos, Texas, so I drove up. But I wanted to say that I work in technology. I just became partner at a firm, small firm, and we create custom software. But what's interesting is we work on a platform that has been around for almost 40 years. So it's almost like the longest, I think it may be one of the longest software platforms that has been around, right? So I feel like it's this unusual space. But what's interesting, and I'll just say the name, it's FileMaker. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but most people, when they say, oh, FileMaker, is that still around? So what's interesting is the product itself has this longevity, right? And it's kind of entered this new era of being around for so long. But along with that goes all the people that use it, all the people that develop in it. So when I go to the FileMaker conferences, most people have gray hair, right? And then I go to the Pinecone conferences and everybody's 25 or under, of course, I feel like the oldest person there. So I'm noticing so much of this generational that has to do with certain products as well. And I still highly believe in the product FileMaker, which is an Apple subsidiary. And I think we're gonna withstand the test of time, but it's like this interesting predicament of how do I, as a partner, and running my business, find, move in this generation with its aging software. So I don't know if I could ask your perspective on this. It's a little bit outside the realm of the conversation, but I'd love to hear it.
I mean, I think my hard question, but I think if you tap into different kinds of intelligence, right? Part of what we're seeing is that when we're young, fluid intelligence is what lights our brain up. So what's new? The new software, the new tool might be a little bit better. I can be the first to, the first mover advantage. As we age, we tend to rely more on crystallized intelligence. Like, what do I know works? I like this. It's solid. It's not a fad. And I could learn something new. I have the capability. That's where that assumption comes from. But I'm not going to do it just because it's the newest iPhone. That's a resource investment I do not have time for. Until somebody shows me that Pinecone is 1,000,000 times better than FileMaker, I'm good. So I think the short version for me would be to recognize that's what's going on. And then it's similar to when someone says, well, should we use Slack or can we keep using, whatever we used before? I don't want to learn this new thing. It's not right or wrong. It's let's talk about what our goals are, right? And for a particular client or a particular goal, which software makes the most sense? And if you think this is going to stand the test of time, being able to say, I totally understand the interest in using this newer tool. Here's what I think's good about it, but this one might be a little less new and shiny, but here's why I think this one is good, right? So I think you have to help cut through some of that noise of what people tend to be drawn to based on age or generation and stick with this is really why it's best for the job. I think that's what you do in negotiating generational norms. Here's what's best for our team and our goal, not your software, their software. That would be my take on it.
And we've got entire industries, too, that have gotten old. And because they haven't formed a strong pipeline because there's been this kind of next best thing. So any public utility, for example, really struggles with recruiting new workers because public utilities are built on analog systems. That's a place right now you can go and you make a lot of money. If you do HVAC, for example, you can make a ton of money in that because it's not this newfangled fancy stuff. And there are entire businesses that have built up. I know this is a little tangential to what you're saying here, but there are all these businesses that have built up around these workers, these experts on these platforms in consulting type settings now, rather than in full enterprises. But yeah, it goes through cycles. products go through cycles at a 40-year period. I mean, that's pretty impressive. It's not apples to apples, but Buick went through a cycle like this where essentially all of its customers aged out of using it, and they gave them an immediate opportunity to reinvent itself. And Buick is now seen as a kind of universally nice car, at least from an American car standard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, and thanks again for coming, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you for a great session. My name is Matt. I'm from Maryland. I do workforce development and DEIA for the government sector.
Nice.
And so I'm very familiar with the shifting demographics, as I come from a place where 45% of my workforce is set to retire within the next 5 years, and less than 10%.
They've been saying that for 20 years now.
They have. Anecdotally, I'm seeing a lot of our executives pull the plug by the end of the year,
Yeah.
end of next year. So we have a lot of knowledge and experience that's getting ready to leave. So we've been curating knowledge transfer documents and things like that. I was curious if you had any advice or ideas of how to encourage or motivate older generations to share that knowledge and actually take the time. What we're actually seeing is that the ones that are the subject matter experts that have 30 plus years experience don't really want to take the time, or it's too overwhelming for them to put everything down on paper or to share with the younger generation, while our Gen Zs and younger millennials are very excited at the prospect of writing down what they're working on and passing it along. So we're trying to bridge that gap for what's coming, but I'm having trouble finding the ability to motivate executives and subject matter experts that have been there for a long time to do that.
I have an idea on this one. So generativity is this idea that we want to pass down what we know to the next generation, but you don't just get that because you're older. I think an idea of what might be behind this is when you're asked to document what you're doing, is there a concern or a threat there? They think, well, as soon as I write that down, they're not going to need me anymore, right? I'm wondering if that's an undercurrent.
Okay.
I've seen some success in this area with creating sort of a understanding why we're asking. Like, you have so much knowledge, and we hope you're here for a really long time to share that. But at some point, when you decide you're ready to move on, we want to make sure future generations benefit from what you've learned. I've seen some really interesting, so if you think about a mutual mentorship, right? The idea of passing it down to people, not like necessarily documenting it. I wonder if they're just the top of my head. I've seen some success with tasking our younger generations to help document that knowledge in a way that's sort of forming a relationship. They can ask questions. That knowledge is shared. There's this mutual respect where, learning the way someone's done something or what they've learned or why that might work in a way where they're sharing it with people, as opposed to let's get all that information out of your brain so that we can elbow you out the door. Whether I've had just a quick anecdote, I know we're out of time. I had a former student who worked at his family business, and his grandfather needed to retire but was sort of lingering around, sort of unsure what to do. And they did this amazing YouTube project where he interviewed his grandfather to get sort of the stories and the knowledge and the lessons and the best practices as a way just to say, in 20 or 30 years, we want everybody to hear what you've learned and benefit from that. So I think giving them context as to why we want it, and then making it sort of an interactive experience about passing down that knowledge versus we're trying to get you out of here. That's my thought. So,
and on that, we have to close out. So if you have follow-up questions, we can meet you just outside of the door. Again, thank you so much for coming in.
I'm signing books at 11:30 if you want to talk more. I'm sure I'll have time to talk.